So welcome, welcome. I am Christine Cox, the director of the Village Square, and it is my true honor to welcome you to our 11th annual Created Equal, this time themed around the soul of food. I know y'all are all thrilled about that topic. So over the past 10 years, we've looked back at the 60th anniversary of the Tallahassee lunch counter sit-ins, listened to the last words of the unarmed, commemorated Florida Emancipation Day, and last year, if you were here with us, you remember we really rocked the house around the theme of music and how music and Black culture has shaped the Black experience throughout history. This year's event continues Created Equal's tradition of bringing people of different backgrounds together to have candid conversations about race in our community. To explain more about today's program, I'd like to introduce you to Leon County's own Kiana Gilley.
Thanks, Christine, and good evening, everyone. I'm happy to be here for this impactful program on behalf of Leon County government. Today's timely conversation about food tells the story of survival, adaptation, and celebration across generations, and continues the main purpose of Created Equal, bringing people together to have hard conversations about race within our own community. As we all know and have tasted today, food is more than just nourishment. It's history on a plate, and hopefully you saw that in our various menus. In kitchens, around dinner tables, and at community gatherings, food has passed down the traditions, memories, and values that define families and cultures. Today, we'll ask you to examine the following questions. How does food reflect the shared histories and identities of Black and Brown communities, and in what ways have these foods traditions become symbols of endurance, pride, and cultural exchange? Before we begin the program, I would like to take a moment to thank the Leon County Board of County Commissioners, whose vision helped make tonight's program possible. And now I'd like to introduce Leon County Commission Chairman Christian Caban to welcome you to tonight's program.
Thank you, Kiana, and thanks to the Village Square for the great partnership that makes this program possible. Good evening, everyone. My name is Christian Caban, and I have the distinct pleasure of serving as the chairman for the Leon County Board of County Commissioners for this year. And I would like to welcome you all to the Created Equal program on behalf of my colleagues at Leon County Government. Tonight marks the 11th annual Created Equal conversation, where we have a frank and candid conversation about race and equity. This year's theme, the soul of food, highlights how food tells the story of survival, adaptation, and celebration across generations. Food has long served as a living record, preserving history, strengthening community, and feeding both body and soul. Since its inception in 2015, Created Equal has changed and engaged thousands in meaningful conversations using a local lens to examine national issues. This award-winning program challenges us to ask tough questions, break down barriers, and deepen our understanding of each and every one another. While this year's theme centers on food, Leon County recognizes food as a powerful tool for connection, health, and equity. We also remain committed to sustaining and continuing the conversation, expanding opportunities, and advancing food access for all. I want to take a moment to recognize some of our distinguished panel and moderators who you'll hear from shortly. We have Rosalind Bentley, Yolanda Bowman, Ravi Howard, Jay Morrill, and Linda Bond Edwards. Let's give each of them a round of applause for joining us here tonight and bringing their expertise. I know some of my colleagues in Leon County Commission couldn't be here this evening, but an event like this would not be possible without the support of my colleagues in Leon County Commission. And so we really do, and I really do serve with such great, distinguished leaders who truly put the citizens of Leon County first. Additionally, we are joined this evening by some dignitaries, and I would like to give them each a round of applause. First, we have the Leon County Administrator Vince Long. Next, we have Leon County Judge Jason Jones. I think he's back here somewhere. Thanks for being here, Judge. And we have former City Commissioner Elaine Bryant. Thanks, Commissioner. Thank you all for being here and supporting. Finally, I want to thank each and every single one of you for joining tonight. Your presence matters, and I encourage you all to actively engage in this conversation by candidly sharing your thoughts and listening to the thoughts of others. I look forward to continuing these conversations about food and food access on the Commission dais and beyond. I also look forward to the conversation ahead and hope that we can continue to celebrate food as a powerful expression of love, memories, and community. Thank you all for joining us again, and I'll turn it back over to you, Kiana.
Thank you, Chairman Caban. We'll start tonight's program with the panel discussion featuring our esteemed panelists and moderator. Following the panel discussion, per Created Equal tradition, we'll turn it over to you to have your own conversations at your table. With that, I'll hand it off to Christine to introduce our moderator.
Thank you, Kiana. It is my distinct honor to introduce our moderator for this evening, Linda Bond Edwards, Esquire. She's a mediator, arbitrator, and workplace consultant with her own firm, Linda Bond Edwards Employment Solutions, LLC, and she serves as the chair of my board of directors at the Village Square. She also moderated our local color series last summer. If you were with us out there at Amicus Brewing, you'll remember that. That was a fun time. You'll also recognize Yolanda and some other people in the room. Florida Supreme Court certified county and circuit civil mediator. She brings extensive experience in labor and employment law and alternative dispute resolution. She earned her law degree from Florida State University's College of Law and a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from the University of Tennessee. Linda has written numerous articles and spoken at both public and private seminars on employment law topics, including wage and hour trends, discrimination, workplace harassment and bullying, and mediation and arbitration. And basically, you all are just very lucky tonight that Linda is one of my very favorite humans on this planet. So you're in wonderful hands, and she's a fabulous moderator. And no pressure, but Linda, take it away.
Thank you, Christine, and welcome to all of you. It is such a pleasure to share this stage with our distinguished panelists this evening, especially around the topic of food. And as we were sitting here getting ready to start, I listened to the conversation, the smiles in the conversation as you enjoyed food. It is such a part of our culture, and we're going to talk a lot about that, well, some about that this evening. And so joining me on this panel, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about them, but then they're going to tell you a little bit more about how they came to enjoy and to learn more, teach more, do more around the subject of food. So we're going to start with Rosalind Bentley. Rosalind is the deputy editor of the Southern Foodways Alliance, which documents and studies the diverse food cultures of the changing American South. She is a professor of practice in the narrative nonfiction MFA program at the University of Georgia. And she's going to tell you a little bit more about how she came to this area of food. Welcome, Rosalind.
Thank you. Can you hear me? All right. Well, thank you for having me, and thanks to Leon County, and thanks to Village Square. And I'm really jealous because we didn't get to eat beforehand, so it smells so good. Uh-oh. Can you hear it?
While they work on Rosalind's mic, we're going to go to our next. Are you going to try Ravi's? Go ahead.
Does this work? All right. Robbie's works. No, I was just saying first, just thanks to Linda, thanks to Christine, thanks to the Village Square and to Leon County for convening this, and also to say it's very hard for us to be up here right now. We didn't get to eat. We smell the food, so we're going to rush through this. So Linda asked beforehand, she said, well, what is it you actually do? And so to explain, what we do at the Southern Foodways Alliance is we document, we study and explore foodways of the South. But really what we do is we ask the question, what does this cool thing, interesting person, neat event tell us about the South right now? And how does it do it through cooking, drink, food, agriculture, and increasingly labor and the environment. So we run a host of stories through our documentary series, our podcast, our quarterly magazine, Gravy, and oral histories, which I would encourage all of you to participate in our oral history program. And just to give you a sense of some of the work that we do, recent story, and Linda and I were talking about this, a fried bologna sandwich story, which was told, though, through the lens of the writer's brother who is serving a life sentence for murder. So we explore that. Then another is the history of the big green egg. Everybody loves it, right? Smokes it. I bet you didn't know, and it's based in Atlanta, I bet you didn't know, it started out centuries ago as a Japanese rice cooker. So we write about that. Another, and then I'm going to wind it over, Jessica B. Harris, food historian, did High on the Hog, right? A piece by her about her love of collard greens and how crestfallen she was to learn that they're actually a green of origin of Northern Europe. Not to say that's where we enjoy collards and kale from. And then one of my personal favorites, because it's based here in the Tallahassee area, is a story of the last blues club in Florida that's on the Delta Blues Trail, done by one Ravi Howard. It was just a beautiful story, and my mother told me a year after, that's where I had my wedding reception. So I say all that to say, food carries a story. It carries a narrative. It takes us from where our ancestors came from to right here where you're sitting. So,
Thank you, Rosalind. Our next panelist is Ravi Howard. Ravi is an American novelist and assistant professor in the creative writing program at Florida State University. So Ravi, as you tell us a little bit more about you, how did you even get into this whole issue of food? I mean, you've written, as it says, you've written novels, you've written stories. How did you get to the subject of food?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to come and speak tonight. As Rosalind mentioned, I had the great pleasure of writing for Gravy, a couple of different pieces for them. I mainly write historical fiction about the civil rights movement, but, you also, in that kind of work, you're looking at how people live day to day. So a lot of these food narratives kind of popped up in that work. But also, it's interesting to be on the stage also with Jay and Yolanda, kind of seeing how they are dealing with the contemporary moment of food. And I wrote on the other end of that spectrum, looking at a archive of African-American cookbooks that I wrote about for Gravy. The earliest was written in the 1820s, so it's amazing to see what traditions are still with us. And among those, and I just went back and looked at my list, I didn't really know, I wasn't looking for the Florida cookbooks at that time, but if any of you know Carrie Mae Garnes Marquez, okay, thank you. She had a cookbook called FAMU Favorites, a compilation of gourmet food recipes. So this was at the University of Alabama, but the idea of going to an archive where there are cookbooks from all over the world, all over America, to find something that's very much connected to Florida A&M, connected to Tallahassee. There are also books about the College Hill community in Tampa, a place called JR's Kitchen in Jacksonville and a Black Heritage Cookbook from Miami-Dade Library. So the idea of just those histories of black folks that have been recorded since the 1820s up until, some of these from the 90s. Most of these are from, 80s and 90s. But just to see the long range of cooking history, of food history, and leading up to what you all are, enjoying tonight by the folks on this stage. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thanks.
Thank you, Ravi. Our next panelist is someone that you are maybe more familiar with, and after tonight, much more familiar with, and that is Yolanda Bowman. Yolanda is the founder and owner of Blackberry Mimosa, a growing, I guess you have some fans out there, Yolanda. A growing culinary brand known for creating memorable food experiences rooted in Southern tradition and hospitality. So Yolanda, as you tell us more about yourself, and I guess your food has spoken a lot tonight, how you got into this whole area of cooking and food and community.
Hey, y'all. So Blackberry Mimosa we're a private catering company specializing in upscale catering events, curated experiences. But more than that, the soul of food for me and the story of Blackberry Mimosa starts with the little girl in Valdosta, Georgia. And so I grew up on a farm, and we had very limited resources, and we ate what we grew. And little did I know that Blackberry Mimosa would be born out of those moments. But for me, I had a mother who was a great cook, but she cooked the same thing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I mean, we had a scheduled menu. On Monday, it was fried chicken. On Tuesday, it may have been spaghetti. On Wednesday, it was tuna or something quick because we had to go to Bible study. And Thursday, something else. Friday, it was always fish. Saturday, we went out, but she always had a pot roast on the stove for Sunday. And my first job was at a local Food Lion. So as our community started to develop and grow, they put a Food Lion there. And as I saw it being built, I kept saying to my mom, I'm going to get a job there. That's going to be my first job. And so I started working at Food Lion, worked there for 5 years, but my first experiences was seeing things that I'd never seen before. I couldn't remember having Brussels sprouts and asparagus, and I had a lady come through my line, and some of you who saw me at Amicus last year during the Local Color series, I talked about this and how it just really changed my life. I had a lady come in, and she had rhubarb, and I was like, what are you going to do with that? And she said, I'm making a pie. And I said, with red celery? What kind of pie you making? And so I started to get to know my customers. I started to really experience food and flavors in a different way than I had growing up. I started collecting cookbooks. And so I had a collection of cookbooks and just having different experiences. And all of that led to where we are now today. And so I try to honor the history of what I know in fresh, local flavors, growing up on a farm. That's what we knew. But doing it in a new way, and hopefully you guys enjoyed what we presented to you today.
Thank you, Yolanda. And last but certainly not least is Jay Morrell.
Hello.
Jay Morrell is the co-owner of Early's Kitchen. I guess you have some fans out there also, Jay. A beloved local restaurant with roots dating back to 1984. And for the last 7 years, Jay has been the person that provides food at the Florida Capitol. So Jay, as you tell us more about yourself, tell us how you even got started with Early's Kitchen and how that has influenced what you're doing now and continue to do.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Good evening. Like she said, I'm Jay Morrell, and I am a certified chef by trade and the co-owner of Early's Kitchen. But before Early's Kitchen, I got started way back when, in the early 80s and 90s. We had a little restaurant next to the railroad tracks down from FAMU called Jake's Deli. At that time, I was a 24-year-old kid, a recent graduate of Florida A&M University, and I was taking prerequisites at Florida State thinking I wanted to get an MBA. I had met Dean Stift at the time, Melvin Stift, and wanted to be in his business school until I took quantitative methods. That made me realize the MBA was not in my future, and corp finance, and marketing, and a few others. But I had a buddy of mine who was coming home from the Army, and during that time there was a little show on television called A Different World. And we wanted to start a restaurant to emulate Mr. Gaines' place. So we were fortunate enough to find this little building just down the hill from Florida A&M. And at the time, like I said, I was 24 years old, no wife, no kids. I didn't want to make a living at it. I didn't want to make any money. I just wanted to have fun. That fast forward, I met my beautiful wife for 30 years. And now I have to make money. But yeah, I worked for Mr. Eddie Early and Miss Cynthia Early in the late 90s after closing Jake's Deli, and my wife and I got married. And we moved to the Orlando area. I worked as a chef at several places and became the executive chef of Rollins College. Then transferred back to my alma mater at Florida A&M. Fast forward some years, Mr. Early and his wife were ready to retire. Interim President Castell Bryant wanted oxtails. So me being the executive chef could not order oxtails. From my purveyor, I went to Mr. Early down to Henry's Meats and got her some oxtails. In the meantime, he says he was ready to retire, had the place on the market for a while, did not have an owner or a potential owner that he thought could carry on his family's legacy, and offered it to my wife and I several times, in which my wife says, "You were self-employed once before. You didn't make any money. You bring home a corporate check now. We like that." But eventually, she knew my passion was entrepreneurship, and we bought Early's Kitchen. And we've been there since 2008, and since then, like she said earlier, excuse me, we do contract food management for the Capitol Building, the Department of Revenue, and a couple other places in town. Thank you.
Thank you to our panelists. And so I have some questions that I want to pose to you. And I will start with Yolanda, because she started out by telling the story of how Blackberry Mimosa got started. Are there other ways that you use food to tell stories about occasions or things like that?
So definitely, I think that food is living history. I think that every dish tells a story, and I think every single one of us can think of something that we absolutely love in the form of food and how it originates in our mind. And it's a story behind that. And it really tells, and whether it's a traditional dish or something that has been recreated to be made new, there's always this seed inside of you in the back of your mind about the history of that dish, where it came from, the story of the people who created it, what it tells. And so Linda and I were talking, and again, some of you guys know me. I'm pretty new to the culinary scene here in Tallahassee. But when I talk about the story of Blackberry Mimosa, some of you know that that story starts, again, as me as a child, walking the dirt road between my mother's house and my grandmother's house and the wild blackberries that grew along that route. And we would pick those blackberries and put them in our shirts and get to my grandmother's house with a stained shirt and drop them in her sink. And 2 hours later, she'd make magic, and it was called a blackberry doobie. And so the story behind that is that blackberries just have a warm place in my heart. Mimosas too, but but blackberries, and really, like I said, that story and the story of so many of us is how we resonate with food.
Thank you. And so, Rosalind, you talked about the wonderful occasions that the Foodways Alliance brings all of that, brings food and culture together, and especially with that gravy. I mean, when someone says gravy, it makes us all feel good, doesn't it? I mean, especially with the magazine called Gravy. Would you just talk about how food does tell the story of culture, history, and community?
Okay. Here's the thing. If you think about it, foodways, food traditions, they don't happen by accident, right? They're practices that people have carried on for generations and generations, and they do so because those things, as you said, like the blackberries, they hold meaning, they have value, and they have usefulness. And so you want to be able to tell stories that show that. I mean, like, for example, if you talk about a pot of greens, right? So I could see us commissioning this story. Any writers out there, you want to do this, let me know. But no, I mean, think about it. If you talk about the period prior to enslavement, right, when Africans, we were on the continent, the greens that we would use to cook might be cassava leaves, it might be jute leaves, it might be bitter leaf, it might be amaranth leaf, and that is made into a one-pot stew, right, of meat, with meat in it, right? But then you have period of enslavement, you have the Middle Passage, you land here, and what's here is collard greens and kale, which is not, those are not greens that are native to the continent. So what do? You adapt, right? And so you cook those in that one pot, in that meat, and it becomes something new. It becomes our own, so that when we have greens here, what we're tasting, yeah, it might be something that is not necessarily African, but what we do to it and the spices that are put in it, it becomes a completely new dish, and it becomes a Southern dish, and it tells a story. So when people riff on that dish, for example, I was at a soul food restaurant a couple weekends ago, actually in Minneapolis, and they had you know how you make the artichoke dip, right? Well, they had made it with collard greens. It was so good. It was really good. So when I say all that to say, that experience in Minneapolis, eating an artichoke dip with collard greens rather than spinach, that's a callback from way back. And so there's always this through line to the past with whatever is on your plate.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so this is a station break. If you drive a white Honda, license plate number 95 BNIX, or you drive a gray Honda, license plate number NDQ B51, please move your car. It is about to be towed. So, sorry to break up the discussion, but you really do need to go and move your car. Thank you. Not going to work, Jay. Thank you. So Ravi, you've heard the recipe, if you will, that Rosalind talked about with the collard green dip. And you heard Yolanda talk about the blackberry doobie. When you were writing about and looking at cookbooks, were there any particular patterns or things that surprised you when you were looking at those cookbooks?
Maybe something that was interesting to me, I gravitated toward the seafood recipes because my family's from Mobile, Alabama, and also Baldwin County. And I was interested in what happened, either, saltwater, seafood, freshwater, but there's something in Mobile called the Jubilee. And when there's certain conditions, the oxygen level drops in the water, so the fish will float on the tide. So black people if people were enslaved in that area or whenever, you could go and without having to fish, if you go at 2, 3 in the morning, as the tide is coming in, you could just scoop up fish and crab with your hands. So people, the one time I almost saw it, I fell asleep in the car. So I maybe was 10 years old. So I think I wrote about that in my first book because I had to imagine it because I'd heard everyone else's stories. But, you would come home and you would see buckets upon buckets of crab in everybody's house. And I lived in Maryland for a while, and so I got a sense of, on the eastern shore of Maryland, what the black seafood culture is there. People in Duval County, people in South Florida. So it is, as Rosalind was saying, what are how do we kind of make things at home if they're from elsewhere? But I was really kind of gravitating to those, or the idea of what it means to live in the South along the water, to have to, as Yolanda said, growing things that you ate or catching things that you ate. So everything kind of came from the hands of you or other people you knew. So that was something that I think I really gravitated to, kind of seeing home on the pages of those cookbooks.
I think Yolanda calls it something on the plate. What do you call it? History on a plate. History on a plate.
And it's amazing that so many of the things that we hold near and dear to our heart, are things that God just gave us, like with the blackberries. We didn't have to go buy them. God just gave them to us. And like, with your family in Florida, with the fish and the crab, and those things are delicatessens. We pay so much for it, but God gives them to you. And, if you catch it at the right time, I imagine, it's a wonderful gift. But that's just such a wonderful story, and about the adaptation of how, food and recipes have come to be, just out of what was given to us, how we've created so many wonderful things.
Thank you. So Jay, let me ask you, how did you come up with a menu at Early's Kitchen? Now, we heard how Interim President Bryant sent you out to get those oxtails, but when you're putting together your own menu at your own restaurant or even at the Capitol, what kinds of things go through your mind?
Well, to be honest with you, early on, that wasn't me. Like I stated, my first restaurant, I was just a young kid trying to have fun, but I was blessed enough to have a grandmother figure, an older sister who knew how to throw it down in the kitchen, Miss Betty Jean Jenkins. And she taught me a lot, even before I started culinary training. I thought I knew how to cook, but Miss Betty, she taught us a lot. She had certain ingredients. I mean, if you didn't have her Clabber Girl baking powder, she didn't want baking powder. And being 24, running back and forth to the store, why doesn't this baking powder work? But Miss Betty was an excellent chef. And at the time, even then, I viewed her as a grandmother, good country cook, and I didn't even really call her a chef at the time because I just didn't know what a chef really was. I thought a chef was a white coat, a tall white hat, and a neckerchief. No, I was so wrong. So a lot of the meals we do today are meals and recipes that I learned from Miss Betty. My father was the cook in my home. And then also, too, Mr. Early. I was sharing a story with Yolanda before the program. She says she fancies our chicken and dumplings. And I told her the first thing I did when I bought Early's Kitchen is I took chicken and dumplings off the menu because I didn't think it was black enough. You know, it wasn't soul food. And I think that lasted a week or two before I learned that not only Mr. Early's customers, but black folk wanted chicken and dumplings. So that played a part in my menu decisions. But then, as becoming a corporate chef, of course, then you look at the menu mix as far as your audience, your customer, of course, pricing. There's a lot of things that goes into the menu mix when coming up with the menu. But for the most part, it's just what tastes good and what I think people buy and enjoy.
How about that? So, Rosalind, would you talk about what you've written about, or what your organization has looked at when it comes to black and brown cultures and the development of food recipes, menus, things like that, or just basically things that we eat?
Okay. We even as we were saying in the opener, we write about so much, the whole gamut of what the diverse food culture is. But since you mentioned black and brown communities, obviously I'm not going to speak for the Latino community, but what I can talk about is the story that we've covered in oral history and others, like the history of the Delta tamale, which, you can order that various places, but that history is when Mexican laborers and workers were brought in the early, 19th century, 1900s, sorry, early 1900s. They were working alongside us, and they would bring this wrapped in corn husk dough meal, like cornmeal, to lunch, because that's, you got to eat. That's how it worked. You got to have sustenance. Over time, black folks were like, well, what's in that? Let me taste it. So then we began to adapt it, and then we start making it, but instead of masa, which is, it's a corn dough, let's say, dried corn, it's soaked in lime, so it'll soften it, so that when you grind it, it's real powdery and feathery, and you can make dough out of it. But instead, for us, we would just take cornmeal, ground meal, and then put our spices on top of it, our chilies, whatever, and then put them in the same corn husk. And instead of steaming them, right, which is what a lot of the Mexican laborers at the time did, we would kind of simmer ours and take it into the field. And so that's kind of the story that we like to tell, that shows you may think of something one way, but there's always a little something more to the story when you dig deep. So that would be an example.
Absolutely. If you want to comment, Ravi?
I think for me, I got a chance to write a story, something my father had always told me about his father, my grandfather, who died before I was born, who worked on the banana boats in Mobile. And so I learned all this history. But again, it was somebody I'd never met, but I'd heard so many of his stories, I wanted to write and try to recreate that history. So as with the recipes that pass down, as with the cookbooks, you're doing things, learning things, sometimes because of people we will never meet, but that lineage has helped us to become educated, or like Jay saying, kind of learning what a chef actually was, the people with all this expertise that wasn't necessarily considered expertise in the culture, but we kind of know now what they were able to do. So just in terms of a storyteller, I had to go back and find everything that had happened, but that labor, and I had been to that area so many times and had not known what the history was there. The kind of port city history that I had a chance to discover. So I'm thankful for that opportunity and to have somewhere to publish it, but to just, revisit those stories, and I can tell my children now.
Good. Thank you. Go ahead. Go ahead.
And I think with our cultures, black and brown, we have started to mesh a lot of the foods. Like you said, we see something, we taste something, and we go home or we make it our own because the way we had it might not be what we're familiar with, but we figure out how to make things new. And I think that's how we keep different cultures alive, how we keep our stories alive, how we keep the history of our food alive is we don't have to be married to how our grandmother made it or how it was always made. Now, that is still always a fond memory, but as you know, we elevate and grow and we have different palates, and we try to present things to people with different palates or expand their palates because, again, I was someone with a very limited palate, and I tried to make sure that my children and my husband and that we experience different things. And most of those things are not origins of my Southern African-American culture. And so we start to mesh and merge all these different cultures just because we like the way things taste. And so I think that's how we keep it alive.
So, you know, as time progresses, we understand that whenever we gather, whether it's a happy occasion, a sad occasion, we eat. We eat. And holidays, sometimes, you know, births, whatever, we eat. So how do we continue that in our culture? Just sharing those recipes, because now, Ravi, cookbooks may not exist anymore. You can find whatever recipe you want online. How do we go about preserving those wonderful memories, those recipes, teaching the young ones how to make certain things and what they mean in our families? How do we do that? And well, I'll start with you, Ravi, since you're the writer, and thank you for writing things down for us so that we do have the written history.
I talked to a student today who got a job working with a writer who didn't love social media but wanted someone to do it for them. And so that was a way of, you know, kind of creating this new archive of presenting the work that this writer had done. And there are a lot of people in the food space who do that as well. So the idea of, you know, somebody with Blackberry Mimosa or Early's Kitchen, and I have seen, you know, every time, you know, you want to go to a restaurant, you can easily find what people have posted. So I think just embracing that kind of new archive, and especially younger folk, you know, I don't consider myself a young person, but the way that young people are maybe embracing those technologies that can present it. Because so many of those cookbooks I found, you know, it was nice to find them, but they are rare at this point because people haven't, you know, there might be one or two of them left, but somebody finds it, they write about it, they present it, and then it's shared to a much bigger audience. So that's part of it, I think.
Okay. So Jay, do you have someone coming behind you that's going to continue or learning from you about Early's Kitchen?
That remains to be seen. I have two sons. My eldest son worked for me briefly.
Briefly.
Yeah. I say briefly. It was a year or two before we both just couldn't take it anymore. And my youngest son, who has a degree in music production, he's a very talented musician. He can play almost every instrument on earth. But he works with me now. And he's kind of torn between food service and going to L.A. and going to Atlanta or whatever. And I try to tell him, you know, like my earlier days with Jake Staley with no wife, no children. I tell him, boy, go. You know, you can eat ramen noodles and sleep on somebody's floor and give it a shot. You know, I'll always be here. Early's Kitchen will always be there, hopefully. So go give it a shot. And then if not, come back and, you know, let's do this thing. But in the meanwhile, I'm teaching him. He's learning without the formal $50,000 culinary school education. I can teach him just as well. So that remains to be seen. We'll see.
Go ahead, Rosalind. Thank you.
I just wanted to just encourage the two of you especially since you were in the kitchens, have somebody in there writing it down. That, I mean, even if they are just recording it on their phone while you're doing it, because, you know, a dash here, a cooking spoon of that there, you know, that gets lost over time. And that's how our histories get lost. So I would just encourage you, if there's a student at FAMU who can get some credit to, you know, to stand with you and write out your measurements, what you do to write down your, not just your Blackberry Doobie recipe, but your story behind it, that's a lot of power. And so I would just encourage you, and even folks out in the audience, if Big Mama's still living, or, you know, Mama or whoever, write it down, because when they go, I mean, I even have students who try to recreate recipes that they remember that their grandmother made, and it's never quite right because nobody wrote it down. So I would just encourage you, write it down, record it, keep it.
I'm sorry, Linda. That's so important. And you were talking about the Blackberry Doobie recipe, and Linda knows this because, again, we were on a local color panel together. I told the audience that they asked me if I made Blackberry Doobie, and I said I never learned the recipe. Never learned the recipe, and I lost my grandmother last year, right before her 93rd birthday. And so, unfortunately, that's something that went with her. And again, you don't really realize how valuable those experiences in the kitchen are, those memories are, until they're gone. But I will say that close to the end of the series, it was a 3-part series, a young lady heard my story, and she came up to me, and she had a piece of folded paper that she printed, and she said, "I found a Blackberry Doobie recipe online for you." And I framed it because that's a part of my grandmother. But like you said, the importance of writing it down and making sure that these stories aren't forgotten. And I think that's why I appreciate this platform and being able to share it, because it does resonate with people, and you do have those connections just through food.
And not only writing it down, but also having them there with you. The technique, you know, I tell folk all the time, I'm not a baker. Baking is a science. I'm not that guy. But cooking, I can figure it out. But even with the recipe in hand, without the proper technique, most people can't recreate. You know, they think, okay, here's a list of ingredients, throw it all in the bowl, stir it up, put it in the oven. Depends on what you're cooking. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's dry ingredients, wet ingredients, this before that. So it's all important, but definitely we have to start with writing it down, and hands-on comes next.
Absolutely. So as we come to the end of our discussion, would each of you just give a final word about the importance of food to you, to your family, to our culture? And all of you have been very kind to extend to our audience the importance of passing those traditions along. So final words by each of you, and I'll start with you, Robbie.
Looking out at all the tables, somebody told me years ago, an artist, what happens when you put a table in the middle of a scene? What happens when you put a table on a stage, on a set? The idea of all the characters gather around it, they're looking at each other, they're speaking, there's something on the table. So they become alive in a particular kind of way. They have particular kinds of conversations, as we are here. So the idea of gathering, whether it is kind of in the imagined space or in the actual space, or the idea of Jay having tables at Early's, or Yolanda as a caterer having a table wherever you want her to be, the idea of having a table in the middle of everything kind of creates a unique kind of conversation. It's a moment, but it's also a memory for, you know, what's going to come after that. So we are looking at what is happening in real time, but also the history and also the future of kind of that table. But that table, this moment, is kind of in the center of all of that. So
Thank you. Yolanda?
That's right. That was good, Robbie. got me following that. But I think, again, for me, I realized that food is one of the most powerful connections that we all share. And so one of the mantras of the Village Square is that we have more in common than we have different. Food is what brings us all together around common themes. We can get at a table and we can disagree outside of the room, but we sit at a table around food. There's conversation, there's creativity, there's education. There's so much about what we do in our lives, how we celebrate things, how we mourn things, how every single emotion is celebrated in food. And for me, it's just such an important thing. And so I always try to honor that and respect that. When we're bringing people to the table, it's about the connections. And so I hope that you all made some connections tonight. And thank you.
Jay, and then we'll let Rosalind finish.
They said it. Food is the centerpiece. It brings us all together. It relaxes us. As you all witnessed just here this evening, before the program, there are many of us that don't know each other at the tables tonight, all different genders and races, but once the food line got going and we sat down, the room was full of chatter. Thank God y'all weren't concentrating on us up here. But food is definitely a connector. It's the glue that can hold us together. It's the, like I said, the centerpiece that brings conversation and culture to the table. Not only does it satisfy your stomach, but it definitely has the means to satisfy your soul.
Rosalind.
I really don't need to say anything. But, okay, I would just say this. Food is also respect. And by that I mean, if I am going to, whether I'm eating barbecue, whether I am eating sushi, whether I am eating ramen, whether I'm, eating a food of another culture, if I look at that plate and I can see someone put love and care and artistry into what's on that plate, I need to respect that. Now, it might not suit my taste immediately, but food can be such a personal expression, and respecting that, I think, also helps me to enjoy the meal all the more. So, I leave it with that.
Thank you. Would you join me in giving our panel a wonderful, wonderful round of applause? Thank you, and we're going to turn it back to Christine.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you all the panelists, and thank you to Linda for her great moderating, too. Everybody did such a fabulous job. I hope you're enjoying the program so far, but it's not over yet, so don't move a muscle. First, I want to also welcome Leon County Commissioner Cummings, who arrived with us somewhere. Oh, there she is. Thank you for being with us. Also, well, no, I'm going to wait and tell you that at the end. So, first of all, this next portion, it's brief, but it's really important. This is an important created equal tradition that everybody really says it's their favorite, but don't tell the panelists because, they did an awesome job too. But this is, as we say at the Village Square, where the magic happens. So we are about to turn it over to respectful, interesting conversations at your tables with the people around you that no doubt have some different perspectives from you on the topic at hand. The goal here is, as we know, not to change each other's minds, right, or judge others' opinions, but really just listen more than talk, maybe, with an open mind and an open heart, and perhaps learn some things while sharing your own perspectives as well. So I will point you to the table rules. Oh, look at that. It's like, I told you, magic. So if you look at the smaller screens, you'll see the table rules. These are just some things, little reminders to kind of keep things in check, keep us all on our best behavior, basically. And then to help get you started on your conversations, you will see the one-page question prompt sheets. So at the big tables on the floor, there's a sheet in the middle of your table. It has the logo on it. And then scattered around the room, there are some of those question prompts as well. You don't have to stick to those, but they're very helpful in keeping you on topic. And if you're not already sitting with a group and you want to kind of group in, we've got our friends in the upper eaves. Give it up to our friends who who went all the way up because we packed the house. That's exciting. But feel free to come on down or move around. There is a big table here in the middle that ended up being empty, so feel free. If you want a table of 8, you can come sit right there. Also on your tables and scattered around, you will see the little recipe cards, and you are maybe wondering, what in the world is this? This is a recipe card, a blank one, that since we're on the topic of food, and people talked about lots of great foods and menu items, and we got some great ones to sample, maybe you want to share them. Maybe you want to write one down and give it to a friend that you just met, or you want to ask them for theirs, whatever, or you want to bring it home and share it with someone else. And speaking of food, lastly, there's still food. So if you're still hungry and you're ready for seconds or thirds, or, no judgment, literally every station still has food, including dessert. I'm shocked that that's still there because I tried it. It's amazing. So we'll take the next 20 minutes or so to have your conversations, and then don't leave. We wrap up quickly after, but we'll do just a tiny bit of sharing out, just from 1 or 2 or maybe 3 inspirational tables. And then we have just something really cool to show you at the end. So enjoy, and our panelists are going to join you as well.